Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we're talking about the badass women of Supernatural. But first, let's let our panelists introduce themselves. Tanya, start us off.
Hi, my name is Tanya Cook. I am a sociology professor at the Community College of Aurora, which is near Denver, and I research fandom and especially charitable activism and action in fandom, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am a big Jody Mills fan and cosplayer.
Cool. Anne?
My name is Ann Wicker, and I'm a former journalist and current editor and writer myself, although not in fantasy yet. But I am also a big Supernatural fan, and like Tanya, I'm a big Jody Mills fan, but I'm also a Donna fan. And probably Gail and I are gonna duke it out about Mary Winchester.
Could be. I thought you were going to say, when this is all over, we're going to road trip to the Family Business Brewing Company, which...
Well, we are. That's
we
a
are.
given.
And Michelle.
My name is Michelle Crowley. I am a lecturer of communication studies at the Northern Kentucky University. That was my cat. He said bye. And I like to, or my research is in the villains, and I'm a soon-to-be new blogger.
Cool. Good. And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write urban fantasy, epic fantasy, and more. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But the thing they all have in common is that they are the kind of world Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. So ghosts, vampires, and things that go bump in the night. Badass women in natural. You know, sometimes the show gets a rap of not having enough women in it. But when we look at it over 15 years, there's some pretty memorable and long-running female characters. So let's just dive in anywhere we want and start off. Who are some of your favorites and why? Jump in.
Okay, I'll go.
Well,
oh no, Anne,
yeah.
Please go.
No, I was going to say, Tanya, go about Jody, and then I'll chime in.
Perfect. I love the fact that we got, and I want to just address something in your comment, Gail, there about the fact that the show was on for 15 years, I think was one of the reasons why we did get to see more and more layered and complex female characters that were around longer. And I think we really saw that dialogue with fandom and fans, and that helped shape that development. I'm thinking about Wayward Daughters, of course, which we can talk about more later. But Jody, I think, was just so wonderful. I mean, Kim was fantastic. I'm just going to be a fan here for a minute. And I also am a middle-aged mom. And so I loved seeing a middle-aged mom, and she kicked ass. And I mean, that's who I want to be. And then created her own kind of found family after suffering serious trauma. And we can, I hope our trauma has not been Jody's trauma, but I think we can all identify with that, you know, going through really difficult times and coming out the other end and needing to create love and kinship for ourselves. So I really thought her story was great. I have a couple issues with when they were initially trying to pair her up with people all the time, but we can go to that later too. And of course, next.
Well, I mean, while we're on Jody, let's just kind of talk about Jody, and then we can move from to person. But you know, having just rewatched Hibbing 911 and before that, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, where of course we start to get the origin stories with Jody and Donna. Jody starts out not knowing what's out there in the dark and finds out in a very horrific way. And people deal with that kind of sudden knowledge very differently. In her case, she just goes right into her training. And even though, you know, her heart's breaking, she does what she's trained to do and she acts. And so does Donna.
Yeah.
And I love that about Jody, is that I have no doubt that she, you know, sat down and drank half a bottle of whiskey and cried her heart out later on. But in the moment, she did what needed to be done, and she helped rescue people and rescue herself. She wasn't the fainting, you know, flower. And I love that about Jody. She's always kicked ass like that.
Oh yeah. And I went back, and according to SuperWiki, she is either in or mentioned in 18 episodes, which I think is the most of any of the women, the main women that we're probably going to talk about tonight. And yeah, she's tough, but we also see that mothering side of her that you mentioned, Tanya, and we see her take charge. Well, not really take charge, because Sam is more in charge, but in Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, but we see her really take charge in hitting 911 and help Donna, you know, cope with this. And, you know, I think if Dean and Tam hadn't showed up, that Donna and Jody would have done it. They would have taken care of it. No question. But it's Sam and Dean's show, so they had to be there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so funny, Gail, and something you had said about Jody kind of going through something traumatic, and her response is not freeze or it's fight. It's get it in gear and function. And I didn't realize this until you said it, but I really identify with that. My husband was one of the very few people who got H1N1 and was in a coma and almost died. He was in a coma for a month. And at the time, my kids were all like 8, 5, and 3, really young. And I couldn't freak out. Like I had to just, when you all of a sudden your otherwise healthy spouse is deathly ill and everything is kind of going through your head about what's going to happen, you have to just shut that down. So I gave myself 10 minutes every day to panic. And and that's what and then I wouldn't let myself go down this. But yeah, that really resonated with me when you said that, because I realized I had to literally do that. Of course, it's not the same, and it's a good story for us. He survived and we're all good, but it was tough. It took a toll.
Well, I remember once, you know, I was in my prior life in corporate, I was in management at the time when it was very much in vogue to give everybody a whole battery of psychological tests. That was the kind of in thing. And I remember in one of them, the tester said, you know, you would be a great person to be in a plane wreck with, because you will get the people off the mountain. Now, they may hate you by the time they get to the bottom of the mountain, and I might drag them by their ankle, but we will all be at the bottom of the mountain come hell or high water. And so, yeah, I identify with that as well, because there have just been times when, well, I look around, there isn't another adult here to do anything. Guess it's me. And I got to suck it up and be the grown up. And Jody does that. And so does Donna. And I love that about their characters. How about you, Michelle?
As you were talking about the role of the mother, and then always kind of like having it together. I don't have children, so I can't speak from a point of knowledge on this, but looking at Jody's character from the very beginning when we first met her. So she had a family, she was the mother, but she also was the cop. And through her entire journey over the 8 seasons that she spanned across, at the end in season 15, we leave her with, even though she's still in that position of power, she has gone back to her motherly role, which, for better or for worse, here we have a middle-aged woman on screen. Is she being shown as the mother? Is she being shown as a matron? Or is she being shown as butt kicker? Jody's story kind of wraps up with her going back to being a mom. And I don't like how, I guess, as a culture, we're seeing such a break between those two. Like, why can't you be a butt-kicking mom that still has it together? We don't see a lot of characters like that. And I think that's one of the more unique things about Jodie, is that, you know, we get to see two sides of femininity in her, and it's, you know, different.
Julie Kenner does a funny urban fantasy series called Carpe Demon. And the idea is, if Buffy the Vampire Slayer quit demon hunting, got married, moved to the suburbs, had kids, and then the demons came back, her husband knows nothing about her past life, and now she's got to sneak out and kill demons in between dropping the kids off at daycare and picking them back up in time for supper. And it's hysterical because it's got all of the urban fantasy tropes around Buffyhood. And it's also somebody who knows what it's like to have to pick the kids up by 6 o'clock from daycare. They start charging you by the minute, and trying to balance those two. And so when you said that about, can't you be both? Now that series is played for laughs much more than, you know, the average Supernatural episode. But I agree, you know, getting to see, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it be both, just like it is for guys? I think is a legit question. And we get a little close to it with some of these characters. Maybe not ideally, but we get some. And then there's Donna. Who wants to dive in first with Donna? Go for it, Anne.
Well, you know, Donna is really tough, but she wears her heart on her sleeve, to use that cliche, much more than Jodie. And really, one of the things I was thinking about today is that, and we might want to get more into this if we talk about Wayward Women or the Wayward Sisters whole thing, is that Jodie was a whole lot more like Dean, and Donna is a whole lot more like Sam. I mean, I hate to equate the male-female thing, but Donna, but in a way, it's different with Donna because she doesn't have the children that Jodie adopts, and she is her, you know, and she doesn't really even have a steady boyfriend. But she gets in there and gets the job done as the sheriff. I was thinking about the episode where her niece stops at the convenience store to get gas and then disappears. And so Donna calls Sam and Dean to come help her because I think she's partly out of her jurisdiction or something. And it turns out that the real villain is like human. And so that was an interesting twist on that whole idea of her being a mother figure to her niece, but also the sheriff dealing with people having disappeared. And she's tough, but yet, like I said, she's softer in a way than Jodie as her character is presented, because she's a lot more affectionate. Jodie hugs the boys, but you know, Donna's the bear hugger, you know. And so I just but I enjoy her character. She's got a little bit more humor going on in some way, but she's not a dumb blonde by any means. She's very
and I think it's interesting. You said, you know, she wears her heart on her sleeve, and she does, and she's very buoyant and vivacious. And even Jodie sort of discounts her because of that initially.
Yeah.
You know, really, oh God, there she is again. And Sam and Dean are kind of trying to lose her because, you know, they think she's just a little too bubbly. And then it ends up, she's not at all the way any of the, you know, none of them gave her full credit for who she really was.
And she,
Oh yeah.
she damn
Oh, yeah.
swung that machete really hard.
Oofta.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you betcha. Yeah, I love the D train, the Donna, because
Oh, yeah.
I'm from Wisconsin and you can hear it now. No, it's and that I think that was brilliantly done because I'm finally happy and proud of my accent. Because my my accent, my regional accent is I have literally been made fun of for it in academic settings and in other settings, and so and not taken seriously, right? Because I also have what other people have called resting nice face. So that perception when you're perceived as nice, like Donna and friendly, people don't take you seriously. And so Jody having to even reckon with that and showing that, I think was just wonderful. The way that a lot of my professor colleagues, if they're younger women, people often think they're students or will demean and diminish them. So that it's in a way a really feminist issue to show a bubbly, friendly, nice person also be a badass.
Yeah. Well, you should have a Southern accent, let me tell you.
Fair enough.
Another thing with Brianna, with the way that Brianna plays Donna is that she and Kim get along so well that they just play off each other. And so Donna and Jody end up being, the yin and the yang of each other. Whereas you have the sunny disposition of Donna and a little bit more, I would say a bit more stoic, a bit more gloomy side that you see in Jody. But when they, that they work together, it's kind of almost the same. No, I can't say almost the same situation like with Sam and Dean, but they fit together. They work together. It's better when they're both there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, even before we had Jody and Donna, we had a few, one episode badass women. And I'm thinking about the sheriff in The Benders, who her brother was taken. She ends up captured along with Sam.
Right.
And she just kills the guy, nothing said about it. She just kills him. And we all knew he had it coming. So nobody was going to miss that guy. And then the detective that Linda Blair played in the episode where it turns out her partner is really the monster, and she lets the boys go. And both of those were very strong female characters who were badass and broke the rules and followed their instinct. We only got to see them for that one episode, but they were good characters.
Mm-hmm.
Another character that does that, she kind of sides with the boys is Gwen Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
So even though she's part of the Campbell clan and very much in Samuel's team, there is that time when Dean goes off and witnesses them kidnapping the alpha vamp instead of killing him, and she keeps her mouth shut about that. And I think that's definitely goes against that kind of ditzy bimbo sort of esque women that we were used to seeing being one-off characters that aren't law enforcement. And so we get to see another type of character with Gwen.
True. Well, and Bella was a character that I didn't want to see as a romance, a romantic interest, but as a frenemy, she could have been great for a few more episodes, almost a Crowley kind of character where you don't know whether she's going to help you or stab you in the back. And isn't that part of the fun? Because she was clever and quick on her feet and so good at what she did that I was sorry to lose her so quickly. I didn't want it to have to be a choice of you have to be a romantic lead or you can't be here.
Yeah, I liked that character a lot as well. And it might be, I know that some of their first attempts to incorporate recurring female characters were not met with great reception by folks, but I loved Ellen and Joe and Bella and those characters. And it might be because I started it in 2014. And so maybe I wasn't in the fandom. I didn't see that reaction or something, but I agree that with that take that you can have female characters without having them be a love interest. Yeah. And that's definitely we probably need to make this a two-parter.
Probably.
Because we're not
Well,
going to get to everyone. But yeah,
and
'cause
you
we
br-
haven't even got to Charlie. So
well, you brought up Ellen and Joe. And Joe's another one where I never bought her as a love interest, but as somebody who was trying to be a hunter and had skills and was and had personal reason to go into it that the boys did. I liked that aspect. I never bought her as a romance. And Ellen, I would have loved to have seen more of because she was that totally badass mom. So I was very sorry when we lost them so early.
Yeah, I really, really liked Ellen. And I mean, she had to be a badass to both be a hunter and run a bar. I mean, either one of those is like, you know.
Let alone a bar for hunters.
Yeah. And so I was really, really upset when they were eliminated, written out of the script, however you want to put it. But it just, but I thought that they couldn't, it seemed to me as a fan, as somebody watching the show, that they couldn't decide, number one, if Ellen was going to be a mother figure or not. And they already had Bobby as the father figure. So did they really need Ellen as a mother figure? And then Joe just seemed too young for Dean. And, you know, Sam is just sort of Sam. And so I didn't get a romance vibe between them either. But I really enjoyed the episode that they did where I can't remember the name of it, but the one about H.H. Holmes.
No exit.
What now?
No exit.
That's it. Because I thought that Joe really held her own and was completely good as a hunter in that one. Didn't panic, you know, as young as she was, didn't panic. She has those badass genes, you know. So anyway, I'm fascinated by that story of H.H. Holmes anyway.
I agree. I love and hate that episode because it actually, I think it was great. Like they did a great job, but it scares the bejesus out of me because I had read Devil in the White City not too long before I saw it and was like,
yeah, my husband grew up in Chicago, so, you know.
Well, and I think one of the things with losing Ellen and Joe and some of the other characters is in that first 5 seasons, they were gradually isolating the boys from help so that more and more it was just them and Bobby at the end. And that's kind of the opposite of what we got pretty much from season 9 on toward 15 was they were allowed to have that found family. They had the AU hunters, they had Jack, they had Cass, they had their mom, they got Bobby back a little bit, and they had Charlie A and Charlie B. You know, they were allowed to have a found family toward the end there, but in that first, you know, Kripke vision, it just kept narrowing it until it was them. And I in my mind anyhow, that kind of contributed to needing to lose those other people. I don't know that that's been written anywhere, but that seemed to be kind of the trend. Tanya, you brought up Charlie.
yeah, there's so many folks that we need to talk about too. I was even thinking of Missouri. Is she the like one of the first episodes?
The psychic.
I have, yeah, and I'll talk about Charlie. I got distracted, so I'm gonna tangent quick and come back. But that was
We can totally second
yeah.
panel.
I have to admit, I didn't love the first season of Supernatural. I'm a naughty fan, but that character was one that I really enjoyed and was like, oh, cool. I hope I see more of this character, and kind of brought me in a little bit more. But yeah, let's talk about Charlie.
While you pivoted to Missouri,
Yeah.
Anne and I have watched all the anime episodes together and did a panel on the anime. And Missouri shows up in the anime more than she does in the actual series. But her character of a wise woman is filtered through the lens of Japanese anime archetypes. So she's more like the older woman in Howl's Moving Castle, the kind of squashed looking woman with, she almost has shamanistic robes and jewelry. And you're looking at this going, okay, that is like totally not American Southwest, but we'll run with it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it is interesting to see how those different constructions of gender and age, you know, those intersections come out in other cultures. Yeah, I have an anime fan in the house, and I'm training him to look for male gaze in anime. But yeah, that I did really enjoy that character, and I know she came back in to the story, but I would have liked to have seen more of her throughout, frankly.
yeah, yeah. She actually inhabits much more of fan fiction than she did the actual show, because she was only in 2 episodes. And she shows up quite a bit in fanfic, which is always nice. You know, we get to spend a lot more time with her. Back to
I think
Charlie.
the reason that she wasn't so much in the rest of the season is because she fell ill after, I think, her second appearance, and then she that kind of mentor-esque character, wise person, went to Bobby instead of her.
That's very possible. Or people have real world, you know, complications and reasons they can't do things. So no, totally understandable. So Charlie.
Yeah, what a fun, fantastic character. And I got to briefly meet Robbie Thompson a couple of years ago, and one of the first things I said, other than and I don't know what fan gush, was thank you for Charlie, right? Because you know, everyone that I know in fandom loves Charlie, and Felicia Day is just so fantastic. And to see a technical person who's like a techie and a nerd and become a hunter that way. I like the way the women have found different paths to hunting, because we only really know like the guys' path to hunting, and I know that they reference a few other hunters, but the women seem to come to that career, if you will, by being contaminated by Sam and Dean. So no, I'm just kidding. Winchesteritis. Anyway, yeah, Charlie's so fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jodie kind of comes to it in the same way that John did, by losing somebody she loved, and so did Ellen. We don't know how much Ellen knew about hunting, or whether or not she was back up to Bill before he died. So, you know, they fridged some of the guys too, as motivation. But yes, it was refreshing to see Charlie not have that tragic backstory to come into it, and kind of find her own way there. And you said about thanking Robbie. I ended up in line to get a handful of fresh kale, so I could do a Gish challenge that required a live video thanking kale or apologizing to kale. And I was at a Comic-Con, and I had no way to find fresh kale except at a health food restaurant. So I went to beg them for a handful of kale, and turned around, Felicia Day was behind me because it was a Comic-Con. And so I got to thank her for Charlie, which was just so much better. And I still got the kale and did the video. But yeah, Charlie was great. I mean, you know, we got a terrific LGBTQ character, gone too soon, and would have been great if hadn't had to happen that way, or hadn't been written that way. It didn't have to happen that way. But the character, damn, she kicked ass.
Oh yeah.
And we got to see Dark Charlie too. I mean, the whole Oz thing, man, now if you want a spin-off, they could have done Charlie Goes to Oz, and I would have been right there for that series. Because Charlie and Dorothy, they were something else.
Oh man.
That would have been a fun,
I would have loved to have seen
fun spinoff.
What?
That would have been a fun spinoff.
Oh, that would have been a great spinoff. And you know, I mean, is Oz in the public domain yet?
Quite a bit of it is. The first several books are, which is how we got things like Wicked.
Yeah.
Well, and Felicia Day is, go ahead.
And if we had had that, she could have sang. And anyway, No, I'm just like, if we could have had an Oz Charlie spinoff. But yeah, that was that death, I think, is my most upsetting on Supernatural. Like that's the one that really, I didn't quit the show, but I know a lot of folks who did over that character's death.
One of the things that made me so angry about it, and I've written about this several times, is, and complained loudly about it other times, is that it was a completely forced error. Somebody as smart as Charlie wouldn't have left the dungeon, wouldn't have parked in front of her motel room, wouldn't have sat in front of a window at a motel room when she knew there were people who were trying to kill her. And frankly, she wouldn't have gotten into a cat fight with Rowena. It was a completely forced error to manipulate a situation so that then they could get the plot to somewhere they wanted it to be. And it wasn't true to the character. Which that makes me mad whenever they do that. It's just bad writing.
The whole story arc was kind of forced in a way too. I mean, although I have to say I loved it when Dean and the Mark went nuts on the guys, you know, when they had captured him. But yeah, the Steins. But you're right. Although I think she still would have had a cat fight with Rowena, but I don't think that she would have left like she did. You know, she could have
Surely
gone.
the dungeon had rooms.
Yeah, yeah.
And really what Charlie's death ended up doing was just reaffirming the storyline is not about other characters. It does center around Sam and Dean, because, you know, her death was a direct cause of Dean with the Mark, as well as, you know, Sam's burning everything in the attempt in order to save his brother. And so, yeah, I mean, he was even willing to put Charlie, Cass, and Rowena, even though she was kind of a frenemy at that point, he was willing just to throw them all under the bus. And so, yeah, even though her Charlie's death was one of those things where it's like, I don't think that's right. But in the grand scheme of things, like, okay, I guess it had to be that way. I wish it was different, but I guess it had to be that way.
Well, and it's another one of those cases where when you have very few gay characters, and, you know, we had the two guys at the Supernatural convention who were LARPing Sam and Dean. We had the two hunters, Caesar and his buddy, and the Chitters, who were retiring after they killed the monster. We didn't have a whole lot of LGBTQ representation. So then to lose Charlie and hit that bury your gays trope, and we'd already had that with Corbin with the Ghost Facers. Come on, guys, get with the modern era. That's just not cool. And I totally understand folks being upset about that, because it's right to be upset about it. And Charlie just totally kicked ass. And I think one of the great things with Felicia Day is she sort of rivals Mark Sheppard for being that person who's been in everything, because her resume as a geek is long and varied.
Yeah, for sure. And I loved her. I haven't read her second book yet, but I loved the first one. So yeah, and I think, you know, when I did a little research on the bury your gays trope for an article I wrote last year about Winona Earp, actually, and how they don't do that. And it's quite intentional as a screenwriting choice. But the issue isn't that you can't have a character death if it's going to play a role in the story. It's that when the representation is so unequal, that is egregious. And in 2016, someone had counted, and it was something like 80% of lesbian characters and female bisexual characters in media were killed off, like right after having consummated a relationship or having voiced their feelings. So it was like that year was especially terrible for that too. I don't know if that was the same year that happened with Charlie. I'm not sure on the timeline, but
it's right up there with the count on, you know, the whole women in refrigerators thing, shorthand, woman has to die a violent, terrible death as the motivation for men to go off and do what they're going to do. It's a comics reference. It's on Google. But, you know, and Supernatural, well, from the get-go kind of plays with that quite a bit with Mary and Jess, but they get better about that, where, oh, she's female. Well, I guess she'll be dead by the end of the episode. Isn't a given anymore. And that was nice to see. So
And I want to circle back to what I was saying before, that when I first watched that story arc, it's back when I was just kind of jumping through the seasons and I really wasn't watching it continually. And when I first saw the episode, I hadn't seen previous ones, and I'd only read a little bit about Charlie on the wiki. And so I had no idea of her sexuality. And so when it was like, oh, okay, characters killed off. Okay, well, I guess that's how it had to be. That was my initial thought. But then as I go back and, you know, the first time we meet her when she's working for Dick Roman Industries, you know, she's talking about scoring at a women's rights benefits or a gala or something like that. And it's like, okay, yeah, that was not the best choice when they killed her off. So I wanted to clarify that my first context of seeing her death was not in the storyline.
So Mother Mary Winchester. Love her, hate her? What do you think?
Well, I like her. And I think it might be because I am one day older than Mary Winchester. So they could be my sons. Hey, I don't have any children either. So I'm, you know, but I get why, you know, it was interesting to me, that conversation near the end where Dean asks Amara why she brought Mary back. And the whole idea of that Dean had idolized his mother and put her on a pedestal and that sort of thing, because, you know, he was 4 years old, and it just, so she was perfect in his mind. And also, you know, we learn later that though John Winchester seemed to idealize the marriage, it wasn't quite that good of a marriage. And then of course his later, you know, just becoming so focused on killing Azazel, I can't say it, however you
Yellow
say
eyes.
it. The yellow eyes, thank you. But I get that. My whole thing after rewatching some of the episodes where she freaks out about coming back and her sons are grown and she's not sure where her place in the world is, and she sort of abandons them, and then she goes off with the Men of Letters, and, you know, David Hayden Jones, I don't know, that was kind of but I think that she and Dean clashed so much because they were a lot alike, that she tried to bury a lot of the feelings that she was having of uncertainty and being overwhelmed and not being able to figure out where her place was. So she dived back into hunting, which she knew she was good at. And the skills that she had learned as a teenager could translate perfectly, but the skills that she had learned as a mother of a 4-year-old and a baby didn't translate to 2 grown men. And so she didn't know, I think she left because she really couldn't handle it. And she didn't want to further ruin, or, you know, she didn't know how to figure out how to relate. That's
I think you bring up a really good point there, because we've talked in other settings about adaptive trauma and how with the current crazy dumpster fire of a world, some of us who had trauma in our background have gone, okay, I know how to handle this, and swing right into world's on fire. We know how to handle this. And that kind of kicks in. May not be tremendously healthy always, but got through it the last time, know how to do this. And I think Mary did that to an extent. Like you said, she knew how to handle one set of problems. She didn't know how to handle the others. My biggest gripe with her, and honestly, if they'd have showed us some of those moments we got in the warm, fuzzy retrospective right before she died, interspersed earlier, I think it would have made a difference. And I think you can really blame the writing on this, is we only saw her abandoning them. We only saw her siding with the people that had tortured Sam so badly. And whether she had a mother's feeling for Sam or just a human feeling for humans, cozying up to them after seeing what they did just felt wrong. We didn't see enough of the better side of her. We saw the abandonment, and we saw the boys hurt, and we saw her letting them down and disappointing them. And I am a mom. I have 3 kids. I would take a bullet for any of them, and I'll be damned if I walk away from them just because it made me uncomfortable. So as a mom, yeah, I was real judgy on Mary, because how dare you put your own, oh, I'm uncomfortable. Well, your mom goes with the job, suck it up. So that's why Anne snickered at the beginning, because when I saw the warm fuzzies at the end, it was like, well, why didn't we get to see those things too? We just got to see the bad stuff. So I blame the writers.
Well, I think, Anne, I was just going to say, I really appreciated your perspective on that, and that she possibly, one of her reasons for leaving could have been that she didn't want to further add to their trauma. And that doesn't mean I didn't also have reactions, because as viewers, we identify with the boys, and they feel like our family or our kids or brothers or whatever. But yeah, I think that I really did like them bringing her back, because it did enable Dean to see his mother as a person, and all of us to see her as a person, and have a more layered, complex presentation. So there's a quote by a sociologist I like. Yeah, you're going to get like one quote in here tonight. That's something to the effect of, there are 2 ways to dehumanize someone. One is by stripping them of all vice, and one is by stripping them of all virtue. And that's by sociologist Matthew Desmond. And I think the caution there is, we want to be careful with anyone in the public eye that we don't allow to be fully human, because that sets us up to either be unable to see them as anything but a villain, or anything but a hero, as infallible. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Sorry to interrupt, Anne.
No, it's a great point.
That's a really great point. And to what Gail was saying about, I'm not a mother, and Gail is, and I get that about taking a bullet for your children or whatever, but I think it was more than just being uncomfortable. I think she was really traumatized by having been brought back. But I have to agree that I think it's the writer's fault for not showing that clearly, that she was so traumatized. And then reading John's journal and finding out, I mean, this was something she never wanted for her children. And she didn't want it for herself, really, to a point. I mean, she wanted to have a regular life. And to realize that her decisions had brought this trauma onto her children. I think it's beyond just being uncomfortable. I think it was, she just really, as a human being, couldn't cope with that.
No, it's a great point. Michelle?
And then we also have, circling back to the beginning with Jody, you know, in the case of Jody, she had this horrible thing happen to her and she gritted her teeth and said, I'll cry about this later. You know, there's a job to be done. And then you have Mary, who is, you know, has this traumatic thing happen and she goes, I'm out, bye, can't deal with this. And here again, we have a very different view, two very different concepts of the mother. We have the mother that will stand up for her kids and will, you know, work to make things right. And then you have the one that is rather self-centered. I go back and forth on how I feel about Mary. And for the most part, I tend to like her because I see her as a deeply flawed character. I see her as someone that is trying to make the best of the worst situation, you know, being dead for 30 years and then just popping back out of nowhere. And it's like, how would I react if I, you know, was reanimated 30 years after my death? I mean, that would be kind of weird. So there's part of that she's dealing with, but then there's also the whole, like, maybe, this is another take, maybe Mary Winchester never wanted to be a mom. You know, she talked about getting away from hunting. She talked about, you know, getting away from her family, but maybe that's one of the reasons that her relationship with John was rocky during the beginning of their marriage, is because, you know, maybe she realized that I don't know how to do anything else but hunt. And this is what I've been trained to do. This is what I do. And so when she's, you know, up against her grown sons, she kind of reverts back to the same things. Like, I don't know how to do anything else. I know I'm good at certain things, so I'm just going to go do that.
Well, it's interesting. It's a good point, because I think the episode was The Song Remains the Same. It was one of the times they threw the boys back in time to try to stop them from being born. And the idea was, if they could break Mary and John up, the boys would never be born and Sam would never, you know, drink the demon blood and all this other stuff. And it almost seems like Mary would have been willing to go along with it, but she was already pregnant with Dean. And so, yeah, that's a real possibility there, is that this wasn't something planned or something that she wanted, or maybe something she felt pressured into given the times. But yeah, that's an interesting take. Well, folks, we are at the end of the hour, so Tanya's totally right. We need to have a part 2 on this, because we haven't gone to so many of the badass women.
Oh, the badass women, Rowena. We haven't even touched on Rowena, but barely.
Yeah. Rowena and Meg and you know, so many.
Abaddon.
Yeah. Part two.
Part 2. Okay.
Part 2.
Two badass
bad women.
Yeah. I was going to be like 2 badass, 2 women. No, I don't know. You know, like that.
Oh, I have to come up with something like that.
Something clever.
So, as we wrap up, let's go around again and let everybody know where they can find you online. Tanya?
You can find me on Twitter at Prof. Tanya Cook or at AK Nerd Fighting.
Awesome. Anne?
You can find me on Facebook mostly. I'm on Instagram too, but I can't tell you what my Instagram thing is. But I'm under Ann Wicker on Facebook. You can find me that way.
Michelle?
And you can find me on Twitter at preheatingprof.
I'm on mostly Facebook. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group, but you can find me pretty much anywhere by looking for Gail Z. Martin or Morgan Bryce. It's in the name of everything else. So thank you so much for being here tonight to talk about badass women. We'll be back with more on that topic. And thank you, everybody, for watching us. There'll be more Supernatural here on Continual. See you online.